None of them knew. How could they? She stood very well in her stolen clothes, very convincingly bipedal. The way she formed her words was convincing too. They didn't know she spoke with stolen vocal cords. It was her first acquisition after crawling through the mouth of the dead homeless woman, sliding through the heroin foam in her mouth, and hollowing her out into a spacious husk where her appendages had plenty of room to vibrate. How lucky to find a ready shell so young and so fresh. But in the process, she lost quite a bit of the insides. The cords were lost, and she needed to speak. So she went to a club, and under the flashing colored lights and through the sweet smell of moistening flesh, she wordlessly convinced a boy to take her home. Their lips locked, and through those lips, she extended her fingers within, wormed them down his throat, and curled them around each vocal cord. And she pulled. She pulled until they snapped like the strings of a banjo. Slurp, slurp, like noodles through her toothless mouth. The young man choked and gurgled, and she incorporated his cords so that she could speak. And she spoke very well. They couldn't know. One of them sighed and shifted in their seat, and she looked up at them, sitting in their folding chairs in the wood-paneled room, surrounded by the staring heads of dead old men and the emblems of their borders. They didn't know. She'd read in an article that making eye contact was a favorable trait from a public speaker. It put people at ease. They laughed. She was putting them at ease with her very good eye contact. How could they know her eyes were stolen too? They couldn't. She needed new eyes after she incorporated her new vocal cords. The eyes of the dead woman had fallen out with the altercation with the young man. He must have been so frightened as he bled out, as his eyeless, toothless, one-time lover looked on and laughed at him with his voice. She didn't need human eyes to see, of course. She had her true eyes. She just needed them to keep up appearances. It didn't take long for her to realize how upsetting seeing an eyeless woman wandering in the dark streets was to humans. They couldn't have known how good the eyeballs tasted, how sweet they were to her fingers within. The urge to put them in her mouth after she scooped them out of the priest was irresistible. Sucking on them slightly and rolling them through her fingers within before the man slumped in his confession booth and muttered his last prayers. Then she popped them out of her mouth and placed them into her empty sockets. They looked perfectly natural, and she used them well. There's no way they could have known. One of them cleared their throat. The fans above did not circulate the stagnant air. Humans in groups weren't usually dangerous, especially when they grouped together voluntarily, especially when they paid to group together voluntarily. But there were enough to overtake her. She remembered that showing teeth was a peaceful gesture, a very popular gesture for humans to do. They called it a smile, so she showed her teeth. They laughed. She was putting them at ease with her teeth. They didn't know she stole her teeth, pulled each one from the man with the mustache and the black shirt groaned and shifted in his chair. He wasn't a threat. He wasn't a threat because he didn't know. He couldn't know. Could he? Unless he wasn't like the rest of them. Through a fold, she extended her fingers within to taste him. 100 fingers within slipped through the fold and stroked his exposed skin, and burning fingers through the fold. She stumbled backwards and retracted her appendages. How could it be burning? How could he do that to her? How could he do that to her fingers within? Did he know? How could he know? He couldn't know unless he was one of them. They weren't like her, and they weren't human, and they could know because they hunted ones like her. And they could reach through the fold with their hidden mouths and their razor teeth and shred her fingers within, shred her fingers within, shred her fingers within, and take apart her shell and shred her fingers and pop her true eyes like they were palmetto bugs in an alleyway. And without her true eyes and without broken, mangled fingers within, she would fall. And she would slip into the floor, and she would divide and separate and pulse and ooze and crawl and crawl and crawl until she collapsed. And her voice within, her true voice, would be naked. She would moan and groan as she slipped away. Did she moan out loud? Why is he standing? Does he know? Do you know? You do. Stay the hell away from me.